I am so pleased to have a very eminent personality of international stature with me. I welcome Hyun, Chief Social Policy in UNICEF India, to the studio of the Blitz India. Thank you so much. Ban worked as Chief Social Policy, Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in UNICEF South Sudan. She also worked Planning Specialist, UNICEF Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office, Nairobi. She is a bachelor degree from Yonsei University and postgraduate certificate Global Health Policy, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University of London. Thank you. Now we are discussing some important issues related to the UNICEF and the Government of India and the citizens of the country. Pan, please tell me, what is the UNICEF India's country program for 2023 to 2027?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Deepak, for having me today. So UNICEF in India has been here over the last 76 years, and we just started our new country program of 5 years, focusing on our support to the government priorities. And this looks at providing health, nutrition, education, child protection, safe water and sanitation for vulnerable children across India, but also looking at the issues of accessing social protection programs and various public policies and programs that benefit children. And our cross-cutting theme is equity and gender. In all our programs, we look at how do we ensure the most vulnerable children have these much critical services. And we also look at how do we ensure that in all we do, we ensure transformation, gender transformation, using various innovations, including digital transformation, and a strong sense of public and private partnerships in what we do.
What is the social policy and the social protection of UNICEF for children and households at the Gram Panchayat level?
Gram Panchayat level. Thank you so much. So social policy programs, we first look at identifying the most vulnerable children of India, looking down at the Gram Panchayat level. So we have a partnership with the elected officials, but women and young people's representative, like the self-help group members and different partners, CSO partners, the local governments, to ensure who are the most vulnerable. Second is, when we identify those that are most vulnerable, there could be the girl child, there could be the ones that are orphaned, there could be the ones that are out of school. What we do is link them to very, very much needed social protection programs, and Government of India has institutionalized and created so many various social protections across the life cycles of a child. For example, the PMMVY, the maternity benefit that provides support to pregnant and lactating women. We have the midday meal, giving opportunities for children to maintain and be in school and learn. We have things like the ICDS and Poshan 2.0 that the government has provided, linking children with much needed early stimulation, early childhood care, as well as nutritious food through the whole apparatus of the Anganwadi Center. So we try to link them with the social protection services, working with partners. And then we try to advocate through the support of government-led child budgets. Maybe I would say 9 states have institutionalized child budgets as part of the state budget planning process to prioritize spending for children. And then lastly, looking at child-friendly local governance down at the Gram Panchayat level. So we have a partnership with the Ministry of Panchayat Raj around the issues of child-friendly local governance, and basically looking at how do we get children and young people to participate in the Gram Panchayat development planning to amplify their voices. And I would say all of this is based on the Constitution of India that guarantees the fundamental rights for children everywhere, despite background, their religion, and different socioeconomic status. And this is very much in line with the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So we work at different levels as social policy.
Issue is, how is UNICEF strengthening social protection initiatives and increasing investment for children at the village level?
We have 13 state offices that cover over 20 states and 2 union territories, and so many GPs. And we have, as social policy, what's called child-friendly local governance. And we have anchored our initiative through the Ministry of Panchayat Raj that works with our nodal ministry, Women Child Development, education, drinking water, and different ministries, and health, in terms of the localization of SDGs at every village level. So this is about having a multi-sectoral program, because we have multi-sectoral program, not only looking at the state departments, we look at local government, we collaborate with district collectors, and I know that the government has started this aspirational districts approach where we have been supporting, and now they're looking at the aspirational block initiative. And I know, Mr. Deepak, we talked about the inspirational villages, and this is our aspiration. We can do more, but whatever we do, we must work at the grassroots level, and this is something that we try to do, both upstream policy work, but we try to work at the grassroots levels, and it's oftentimes about partnerships with the local government, the local actors. As I mentioned, the self-help group members that have transformed, I would say, villages through their work. They have even done a few states that I visited, the self-help group members were the ones who were identifying families with children with disability, elderly who weren't able to access the disability benefit or the old age pension. They went house to house to find and locate who are vulnerable and trying to help them access the social protection entitlements that were provided by the government. And this has been so critical. I would say the Indian government has used the digital technology like direct cash transfer benefits. They use innovations to ensure that there's timely cash transfers during the most difficult times in COVID-19, when many people were not able to work due to the lockdown measures. So those became a lifeline, like MGN-REG, the Rural Employment Guarantee Program, providing the lifeline for vulnerable families who didn't have that livelihood opportunities. We have many examples to cite. The PDS, of course, provided support during difficult times. So we have a lot to learn from, but we would say that the local actors and communities and young people and children themselves in the villages can play a role to ensure that social protection programs can be delivered to vulnerable children and women of India.
You have very deep research in Gram Panchayat level activities. Now we are coming on the government policy. How is UNICEF assisting the Indian government at policy and implementation level in the villages?
We are present, as I mentioned, that we have partnership with many state institutional rural development. So one aspect is capacity building of local elected officials, but also those at the community level through our partnership with the SRRDs, but at the national level, NIRDPR. We have a partnership, and in Kerala, we have the Killa Kerala Institute of Local Administration. So we have a lot of partners that deliver capacity building support around the localization of SDGs agenda of the government. But we also look at evidence generation. I mean, we do a lot of action research. We have partnership with academia at both national, state, and local level to ensure that we have capture critical evidence in terms of what is working well. So identification of good practices from India to be able to share with other Indian states. But I will say in India, there's so many good practices that can be shared outside of India. So we feel that this is a key role for UNICEF, where we facilitate knowledge, experience that we learn as UNICEF from India to also other countries that we operate across, I would say, over 190 countries and territories. And at the village level, I would say what is critical is the community voice. So we have something called community-based monitoring initiative, trying to find out, working with the consortium of CSOs, what is the voices from the communities in terms of what can we do better as UNICEF, but what can we do to facilitate government deliver essential services in a faster and timely and a quality manner. So some of the initiatives, just to name a few.
Now we are discuss over child social protection. So how is UNICEF promoting integrated, universal and child-sensitive social protection programs of the Indian government?
So as I mentioned, India actually has, I would say, one of the largest social protection programs in terms of scale and numbers, which is in India. And this year and a few years back, we have been trying to support the government in terms of their girl-child cash transfer program. So we are currently doing a multi-state study around the adolescent girl cash transfer programs happening and trying to learn from them. But also these cash transfer programs actually provide strong linkages, not only scholarship programs, but linkages with skilling of adolescent girls to join the job market. So what are the most relevant skills to have? We also look at social protection programs that support the early years. There's a lot of evidence out there that if you have, for example, child grants that target the year from 0 to 6. This has the highest return on investment for an economy, for a society. Things like there's evidence that shows that $1 invested in routine child immunization can have a return of up to $60. $1 invested in girl-child education, $5. $1 on social protection in general, generating $2 back to the community. So we try to gather not only India-specific evidence, but regional and global evidence to share with the government and partners that are working in this space.
Now we are coming over the collaboration. How is UNICEF supporting state governments at district and panchayat levels?
So we have, I think the government launched the aspirational districts approach. So we as UNICEF have been supporting across our 13 state offices the aspirational districts approach. So UNICEF is one partner, but we also have multiple partners working in the same agenda. So we have been working closely at many states with the district collector's office that have a key coordinating role to ensure that there's multi-sectoral package of social services from health to nutrition to education, protection, water delivered to the communities. So we have been, I would say, involved in the coordination, but also at the planning stage, sharing, different insights we may have had working across, in India for the last 76 years. So we have learned, for example, India, when we started off in India, there was a child health immunization campaign through the whole community health workers. And this has become actually a model that was exported to other countries. And we see the same model being used in Africa, Latin America, other parts of Asia. We also started in India through our partnership with government at local level, district level to state level, the whole water revolution and the sanitation, ODF, open defecation free villages. I served in Africa for many years. I learned that all of these models that were very, I would say, proven, scalable, sustainable models that were actually started in India. So it's such a privilege to be here now after many years working in UNICEF to actually learn that all of these work, we have in mind not only looking at that particular district, we want that model that is successful in that district to inform the other districts, the other states and the other countries where UNICEF operates in.
You explained very well. The other related issue is how many children-friendly villages have been established by UNICEF?
Okay, this one I may have to come back to you on, but we have been working in the child-friendly child-friendly local governance space where it focuses on ensuring that the Bal Sabhas are institutionalized across all of the villages of India. And this is the aspiration of the government of India. So Ministry of Panchayat Raj has been supporting, together with UNICEF, all of the multiple departments, developing models of what child-friendly villages could look like. And one I would say is, as I mentioned, investing in the early years. But second, key age group is adolescents. They have age-specific vulnerabilities. So when we look at early years from 0 to 6, you look at the nutrition, the early stimulation, early education, including foundational literacy and numeracy. But in the adolescent age group, you have issues of, child marriage. There's issues of, needing to empower them to have that skills to also join the job market, be a productive member of the labor force. So there's different issues that they grapple with. So we look at both groups as a key kind of approach.
Since long I am listening, first time UNICEF is focusing on the Gram Panchayat level. So what is the role of civil societies in strengthening the UNICEF agenda at the ground level, and how they work with UNICEF at the panchayat level?
So civil society partners are critical. I mean, UNICEF is one actor, but in India you have a very vibrant civil society space. And you have many local faith-based organizations, but many civil society that focus on health issues, nutrition issues, education issues, protection issues, even water. So we have been collaborating not only in India, but we have a civil society partnership strategy. And then more and more, we also look at private sector, because now private sector is having a huge role everywhere, whether it's rural villages or urban spaces. So we have, I would say, multiple partners, not only CSOs, but CSOs, private sector. We have partnership with academia. We have partnership with think tanks. So we try to create a partnership strategy that will deliver the best services for children, because we can't go it alone.
Now I'm coming over what is the global mandate of the UNICEF, and how is it aligned with the Government of India's policies?
Yes. So we have as UNICEF what's called the Global Strategic Plan. And this time it's a 5-year plan, which we aligned our country program to. But all of these strategic plan is developed in a consultative process. So while developing the strategic plan, we consult governments. We consult all of the member states operating in as permanent representatives. We consult young people and children themselves. We consult civil society partners, private sector. So this has been a multi-partnership effort to devise a strategic plan. And I would say one big bucket after COVID-19 pandemic, a focus on health. Universal access to health and nutrition, that's one big area of priority. And the COVID-19 pandemic showed that this pandemic did not, whether whether or not you were low income, middle income, high income, it affected everybody, regardless of socioeconomic status. But at the same time, it offered a lot of opportunities for innovation. So India's role was critical during the pandemic as innovating around production of vaccines, but delivering these vaccines to much needed regions like Africa. So that's one area I would say helped. But at the same time, because of the pandemic, there was a lot of children that were missed out in terms of routine immunization. So one of the big priorities now is catch up on routine immunization. So there's a global call, even during the G20, to ensure that these children are back on track in terms of immunization. And then second priority is learning, education. So during the pandemic, so many children for close to 2 years or more were out of learning. And then many children continue to be out of school and not learning. We also saw huge problems with digital divide. Those who had access to device and remote learning, they were able to join. But those in rural areas were not able to access, missed out completely 2 years. So now the organization has called, with other partners, what's called learning crisis, because 9 out of 10 children, I read recently, by the time they're 7 out of 10 children that are 10 years old cannot even read or comprehend simple text. So we're trying to do a huge recovery on learning, and that's the second priority. And then third continues to be climate change and water and sanitation. Because without clean access to water and sanitation conditions, you cannot achieve health or nutrition objectives or education for that matter. So, and then the climate change effects have really, become an issue, because most of the brunt of the climate change effects like floods, disasters, cyclones, environmental degradation are children and women all over the world. So that's climate change. And then fourth is protection. So we are in a world where even during the COVID-19 pandemic, many children were faced with vulnerabilities, including violence, exploitation, abuse, child labor. So this is an area that we continue to work on. And also issues of child marriage continues to be an issue in many countries. So we focus on that. And then last but not least is social policy and social protection. We found that 1 in 4 people in the world, children in the world, were not able to access social protection programs. But those countries like India, where they invested in national social protection programs, were better off because they were able to immediately provide relief for vulnerable people because they were captured in the database, the beneficiary list, so they were able to at least reach a large segment of population. So we're focusing on child inclusive, universal social protection as a last pillar. And then of course we have as a common thread, digital transformation, technology, public-private sector partnerships, and innovation, and investing in strong evidence to be able to better inform governments.
Now we are coming over the most important issue, G20. There is a view that in some section of the society is very keen about to know the working of the UNICEF, because UNICEF is the very prominent agency which is engaged in rural area. So which is the way of the UNICEF contribution to G20? What are the key issues which it proposes to take up at the G20 summit?
So G20 is such a critical issue, and under India's presidency, there's multiple challenges facing the world today. As we talked about the pandemic, the climate change, sustainable development, and I was very pleased to see that the G20 under India's presidency prioritized SDG commitment. It prioritized climate change, including the lifestyle for environment. It prioritized digital innovations and digital public infrastructure. It also prioritized women-led development. So these are very, very relevant themes for UNICEF. And what UNICEF is doing is using the force of G20. This represents, I think, 85% of the world's GDP, G20 leadership. It represents 75% of the world trade. It also represents 2/3 of the population because members like India is part of G20. And there is a whole issue of demographic dividend for the young people. So as UNICEF, we are working on Think 20. We are supporting, for example, UNICEF, we're working with T20 member RIS around the T20 agenda, which is a Think 20, meaning idea bank for the G20, all of the engagement tracks. And I was recently in a T20 special event in Bhopal, where for the first time, there was a T20 declaration with a dedicated chapter on children. And it says, children are future. And let's invest in the early years through universal child grants. Let's invest in adolescence, the skilling, ensuring that they're part of the tech-driven growth, part of equipping them with digital literacy. Let them be part of the innovative solutions for the problems of climate change. Let's look at child budgets and focus on ECD because investing in children is investing in humanity. So in a short, T20, and then we're also collaborating on the health working group around, as I mentioned, with a key focus on primary health care, but also catching up on routine immunization for children. We're participating in the education working group to support the government. And this looks at foundational literacy and numeracy. As I mentioned, that we need to catch up on education. We need to recover on education. And we're also working on Urban 20. Urban 20 because the world is rapidly urbanizing and there's a lot of vulnerabilities on urban. There's links to climate change. So we have been working closely with the Urban 20 agenda to ensure that there's child-inclusive, centric urban planning and governance. And I would say that we want to model what's happened at the Gram Panchayat level. In the localization of SDGs in rural villages, we have institutionalized Bal Sabhas and Mahila Sabhas. We want to see the equivalent happen in urban governance, where we have a Bal Sabha and Mahila Sabha for urban municipal planning and governance. So this is an area that we work on. And then the last second is DRR working group. So we are prioritizing the shock response to social protection with the effects of climate change, the recurring disasters. We need, as G20 members, but beyond G20, invest in shock responsive adaptive social protection program. Existing social protection programs that India has, other governments has, can be adapted to ensure that in the face of disaster and climatic shocks, these are quickly used to protect their citizens, including the most vulnerable who are children and women. Second, shock responsive social protection is so relevant now because we talked about green economy and green growth. We need a safety net to ensure that during the transition to green growth sectors, there may be issues of loss of livelihoods. There needs a bit of time for young people to skill themselves to the transition, so we need a safety net. And then last but not least is Y20. We are working on amplifying the voices of children and young people through the UHA platform, working together with Y20 to ensure that children and young people themselves are participating in the G20 process. So I would say that in a nutshell, UNICEF is trying to support the government, whether it be from national think tanks, whether it be Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Urban, MWCD, Panchayat Raj, to ensure that children and young people's agenda, and I would say the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is at the top of the agenda for the G20 leadership. And what I would love to commend the government is under India's G20 presidency, they talk about inclusive G20. So when I went to the T20 Bhopal event, it was not only about G20 members. It was members from Africa, it was members from South Asia, really promoting India as a development model that other nations can follow. And I think India is very, very well poised to do that. You represent both the G20, but the global South. And I would like to reiterate the ethos of G20: one Earth, one family, and one future. And one Earth, children and young people will inherit this Earth. And they face most of the vulnerabilities from climate change. So they need to be part of the solution. And then one family, as a family, who do we prioritize? The youngest and our children. Because investing in children actually is the whole role of the family. And I think as a overall G20 family, we should prioritize the youngest, which is children and young people. And then one future, I would say that the children and young people are the future. And they need to be part of the solutions and innovative solutions for tackling the most complex crises, interlinked crises that the world is facing now. As I mentioned, the pandemic, we may have more pandemics, we have climate change, we have the lagging sustainable development goals agenda. It really needs a rescue plan, as the Secretary General has mentioned. So this is something that I would say that India is, I'm very excited to be in India at this historic moment when India is hosting in the G20.
You mentioned about SDG Sustainable Development Goals. The most important question before the nation, before the UN agencies, the SDG literacy and SDG awareness.
I totally agree. I'm actually learning from India. SDGs. I hear SDGs at the most top level, the Honorable PMO, who has prioritized SDG commitment and action as the one priority for the G20. I hear it at national level, state level, whether it be a conversation about the aspirational districts, they talk about SDGs. At the local level, through the localization of SDGs, they're trying to reach every GP. And it has to be contextualized to the language, the culture, and SDGs can mean different things. Priority SDGs can mean different things for each village, because for one village, it could be about reducing the poverty of the village. So under the localization of SDG themes of MOPR, they have 9 themes. One could be about a healthy village, one could be about a clean village, and then one could be about, I would prioritize child-friendly and women-friendly villages because they cover all SDGs. And out of, I would say, over 230 SDGs, 44 SDGs are relevant to children. So that's close to 30% of the SDGs. So without realizing child rights, the world cannot achieve SDGs. So just for that reason, I would say that we need to localize as much as possible, accelerate the literacy, as you mentioned, about the SDGs, so that everybody can own up and play a role in terms of SDGs. It's similar to the LIFE campaign, of where individual actions for SDGs can actually have a catalytic outcome for the SDGs, and that means universal, I would say, Declaration of Human Rights. It's actually the SDGs are framed around that, so everybody plays a role. We can achieve the SDGs. And India, let's say, achieves the SDGs. We are there.
Now we are going to put a very critical and tough question before you. There is a view in some sections that UNICEF working is not pragmatic. It is not on the ground. They say it only works on paper, prepare reports and carries out surveys, nothing substantial. What is your take on that?
That is a very tough question. So if there is feedback about UNICEF, of course, we appreciate it. We need to do better. We need to learn from our mistakes. We need to take corrective action. So I appreciate your feedback. We do try to work at both policy, program, partnerships level. I think the model for India, because it's a middle-income country and moving towards high-income country, the model of programming is different from other countries in different parts of the world, where more and more we were involved directly in service delivery, helping the governments. But here you have a strong government, you have a lot of resources, so we have been focusing on both levels, policy upstream and downstream. So we do try our best to work down at the community level, but we need to expand our partnership, we need to work smartly, invest in the right programs, and we would seek advice from many partners as yourself to ensure that we really have a balanced approach and that works to reach the most vulnerable. I would say that public policies is like a scaffolding. You have the policies, but you work on that, as you mentioned, like evidence, but this is for designing and implementing the programs. And then once you can stand on your own, you don't need the scaffolding, right? So it runs on itself because it's so it's like a well-oiled machine. So I think we are trying to find the right balance to do both policy, but also provide pragmatic advice to government and support to government to ensure that the programs are implemented efficiently, effectively to deliver social services for children. But we will appreciate your advice.
This is the important question before us. We all know that under Prime Minister Modi's visionary leadership and as a result of his government's multiple initiatives, India is heading to be a global superpower. What is the learning from this for a multilateral agency like the UNICEF?
Thank you so much. I would say that the Honorable Prime Minister, when he took up the G20 presidency, prioritized the leave no one behind agenda of the SDGs. He put as number one priority SDG commitment, which it was very inspiring, and this is something that all of the agencies and multilateral institutions can learn from. And as UNICEF, we take it to heart. We look at the furthest behind children in line with the vision. And the G20 is a great opportunity to be able to learn, consolidate evidence, to share with not only the G20 countries, but also outside of the G20 countries, as he is promoting a very inclusive G20.
This is the last very prominent and personal question to you. Lastly, a question on the personal front. Your family's relationship with India is quite deep. Your father Ban Ki-moon had spent a long time in India, and your husband Siddharth Chatterjee, UNRC in China, is a former officer of the Indian Army. How much the Indian culture and social values are influencing and shaping your mindset and work ethos?
Thank you so much for the question. Every day I'm feel so privileged and honored to be able to serve in India. And where my father says is half of his heart is in India, my heart is currently fully in India to serve the children and women of India. And of course, I'm always inspired every day. The cultural diversity, the rich culture, even the amazing food and the people. I meet so many wonderful people that I learn from every day in my work, so I find it as a huge inspiration and privilege to be able to serve. And especially during this very historic moment for India, where India is hosting the G20, where I think there could be catalytic and very important, significant milestones for child rights of not only India, but G20 countries and outside of G20 countries.
Thank you, Hyun. You gave me the very precious time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.